Fight fans, welcome to the PBC Podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Bouhairie and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome everyone to the PBC Podcast. I'm PBC's Kenneth Bouhairie.
I'm Michael Rosenthal, editor of USA Today's Boxing Junkie.
And thank you all for joining us for another episode. This week we've got 4-division world champion Mikey Garcia stopping by, and he's got plenty to say. We're also going to take a look at some intriguing matchups this week in the world of boxing. And in our toe-to-toe section, Mike and I are going to settle the debates once and for all as we examine De La Hoya versus Whitaker, Mayweather versus Castillo, the first one, and of course, Hagler versus Leonard. We're going to share our thoughts on who won the fight, on each fight, and why. But first, let's catch up on some recent news, starting with the Super Bowl this past weekend. We all saw what happened. Tampa Bay Buccaneers put a whooping on the Kansas City Chiefs, 31-9. Tom Brady wins a 7th ring, putting some serious separation between himself and other great quarterbacks. But as a game, Mike, I can't say I enjoyed this one. I mean, it wasn't very competitive.
No, it wasn't. The Chiefs just got their behinds kicked, didn't they? I thought Patrick Mahomes was really classy afterwards, saying that they just, what we just said, that they just beat him up. I mean, it was what it was. I really think injuries on the Chiefs side were a big factor, though. Mahomes ran for his life the entire game. I'm not sure I've ever seen a game quite like that. Because they had just had injuries on the offensive line. It was a makeshift line. They just couldn't protect them. And the Bucs have a good defensive line, so it was a bad combination. And Mahomes couldn't move as well as he normally does. He's got an injured toe. I think he's going to have surgery on the toe now that the season's over. So that was just too much to overcome. But you have to give Tom Brady and the Bucs credit. They've just played a really, really good game. Kudos to them.
Yeah, and you said last week that, you know what, the way they've been
rolling,
sort of playing throughout these playoffs, that, they had a pretty good shot. Look, I've heard a lot of people complaining about the officiating. Yeah, the ref didn't do the Chiefs any favors, but that's not why they lost. I mean, great offensive play from the Buccaneers and a great effort by the defense. Great game plan by the defensive coordinator, Todd Bowles. I think he deserves another head coaching job. And congrats to Jason Pierre-Paul, who I've loved since, the Giants drafted him. I'm a huge Giants fan. Obviously, I still believe the worst move Giants GM Dave Gettleman has made thus far was getting rid of him, and he hasn't made too many great moves if you ask Giants fans. But to me, that certainly was the worst. Now let's get back to boxing. The WBA has announced that the legendary Manny Pacquiao, who has not defended his title in 19 months, is now their welterweight champion in recess. Your Dennis Ugas, formerly their regular champion, is now the WBA Super 147-pound world champion. A lot of folks are upset at the WBA for these maneuverings. Mike, what did you make of this decision?
I rarely have anything nice to say about the sanctioning bodies, but I think they handled this correctly. At least you can argue that they handled this correctly. Pacquiao, as you said, hadn't fought in such a long time, in good part because of the COVID-19 pandemic. He doesn't have a fight set, and there's even talk that he might take part in an exhibition against a lightweight. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with anything, but my point is that who knows when Pacquiao is going to be back in the ring? We just have no idea. So I think, making him champion in recess kind of makes sense. So Ugas will do his thing, and then however that plays out, then Pacquiao will be in position to fight for the title that just was stripped from him. So I think it's a fine move. I doubt that Pacquiao even has a problem with it.
Yeah, I think after 19 months, the WBA probably felt compelled to do something. I hope they reached out to Team Pacquiao. I was reading somewhere that perhaps they didn't. I don't know if they did or didn't. Manny has a lot of people who say they represent him, but I believe it was time. Your Dennis Ugas has proven himself to be an elite welterweight and one of the most active welterweights as well. He fought twice last year, something that a lot of folks did, 7 times since 2019 with some really nice wins. And now he's one of the major players at 147 pounds. Who would you like to see him fight next?
Well, One of the advantages of being a title holder is that you become you get more leverage and you become a more attractive opponent. For example, Errol Spence Jr. has a better reason to fight Ugas now than he would have before, right? And it seems like he might be headed in that direction, a title unification fight with Spence, which is obviously good for both guys. The winner would have 3 of the 4 major titles, which is a significant thing, even if you don't think much of titles in general. If Ugas doesn't get Spence, then I think any of the top guys would do. I think he'd like another shot at Sean Porter after Porter's disputed victory in their first fight. I was at that fight. It was a really close fight. Yeah. Guys like Danny Garcia, Mikey Garcia are legitimate opponents. The point is the Cuban has more options than ever right now. He's in a very good position.
Yeah, and I think a unification bout is inevitable. A Spence matchup, it's terrific. Terrific fight between 2 top welterweights. I wouldn't mind seeing Ugas against Keith Thurman next either. With perhaps the winner. Yeah, maybe the winner gets Spence. Jamal James is another possibility. Mikey Garcia. I mean, there are lots of names to choose from for Ugas. Now, speaking of Jamal James, with all of these changes, he's been elevated from interim WBA welterweight champion to regular WBA welterweight champion. We mentioned him as a potential opponent for Ugas. Who would you like to see him face?
Who's the irregular champion? That's what I want to know. I don't think much of that title, but it does put him in a better position because these guys want belts. So I think James becomes a more attractive target now. He just beat Thomas Dulorme, looked real good doing it. Sure. I'm sure he'll want to take another step up in opposition if he can. He's another guy I think is a legitimate opponent for anyone. But maybe here's the problem for him. I think he's still building his name, so I'm not sure he would be the number 1 choice for some of the top guys. He is ranked number 1 by the WBA behind Ugas and Pacquiao, so he's in line there. Then just name the guys: Danny, Mike Garcia, Thurman, Porter, any of these guys. Maybe they don't get the fight, the number 1 fight they want. Maybe then they fight James, and then that becomes an incredible opportunity for James. I think that might be what he's looking for. Bottom line for him, I think he's going to have to be patient, but his time will come if he keeps winning, and I think there's a good chance he'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, he could potentially face, Ugas or Thurman or one of the Garcias, Mikey Garcia or Danny Garcia. But you're right. I still feel like he's not quite in terms of star power where he could be. I could see him fighting Josecito Lopez next. That would be a real interesting fight. I know Lopez really wants a crack at a world title, or maybe, perhaps not just yet, but sometime later in the year, I could see an Eimantas Stanionis fight. That'd be a great step up for Stanionis, a great fight for both of those guys. All right, it's time to bring in our guest this week. He's a 4-division world champion, one of the greatest fighters of this modern era, Mikey Garcia. Mikey, first and foremost, on behalf of myself and Mike, the PBC family, and just boxing fans, period, we want to offer our condolences to you on the recent loss of your mom. The Garcia family has established itself as one of, if not the leading family in the sport. So we just want to pay our respects to her for the role that she no doubt played in that success over the years. So I guess my first question is, how are you and your family doing?
I appreciate the words. We're okay. It's not easy to accept, the loss of a loved one. In this case, my mother. My mom, it's always, been around, showing lots of love and support to me and everyone in my family. But, you just kind of have to accept, that this is life. And, when we start looking at the good things that my mom saw, the good memories that we gave her and the memories that she's given us and all the love and everything, it helps us cope with her loss. Overall, like I said, we're okay. We're doing fine. It was a surprise. We didn't expect this to happen, and but we gotta do our best to keep moving forward, to keep just remembering the good times, the good smiles and the good moments.
Does it help that you guys have that sort of solidarity, you, your brothers and your father and so forth? Does it help the pain a bit that you guys are so close?
of course, we see each other daily at the gym. We hang out with each other, so that, keeping us close together, shows lots of support for one another. And not just, between my brother and my dad, but my sisters, my older brother, Danny, we always keep in touch, even if it's just through a phone call or text or, especially here, we see each other on the days, on the weekends and the evenings. So that's helped a lot.
That's really good to hear. You mentioned the gym. I saw some videos. I've seen you back in the gym lately. Are you just working your way back into shape, or do you have a fight coming up?
Don't have a fight, but it's also part of just getting in shape. Want to get back in it. I hadn't been in the gym in a long time, and just felt like it's time to get back in there, start getting in shape.
Is it easy to get right back to it? I mean, when you gain weight, or do you have to kind of go in slowly and gradually get rolling?
Well, I mean, I'm not going crazy. I'm not in training camp, so I'm there. I'm there 3 days out of the week. I'm doing some conditioning. 2 days out of the week, I'm doing the boxing. So it's just to not burn myself out.
Got it.
Since I haven't done anything else, if I go too hard, I'd probably kill myself, and I wouldn't want to go back.
Right.
So, taking it slowly, easing into it.
Very good. Some people seem to think, and I hear this all the time, some people seem to think that 140 is a more natural weight for you. Can you address that? Is the plan to stay at 47?
I already told many people, but people don't listen, or they're not smart enough to see the big picture. Look, if I fight at 140, the two world champions, one of them, Jose Ramirez, who's a friend of mine, works out with my brother, and we work out together. He's holding 2 titles, the WBO and the WBC. The other champion being Josh Taylor. He holds the IBF and the WBA. So both of them promoted by Top Rank. They both seem to be having something, soon. I think in May they're fighting each other. Winner takes all. Based on past history with Top Rank and myself, I don't see any opportunity of me getting a title fight at 140. So what the hell am I going to do at 140? I can fight other guys, but I ain't going to get a title shot. So that's why I decided to campaign and stay at 147, where I do have more options, where the fights are available, for big names and for title fights.
Do you think the suggestion that you're like a small 147 pounder, is that just off base, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's true. I'm not a 147. I'm not a big dude at all. I'm actually a small guy. Even for 140, I could be considered a smaller fighter. I'll remind everybody, I started at featherweight. I was champion at featherweight, 126 pounds, and I've gradually moved up in weight class. But, these guys at 40 and 47 are naturally much bigger than me, size, physical size. So I am fighting at above my weight class, what my body should be fighting at. But I take it. That's part of the challenge that I'm taking. I know my abilities. I know what I can do, and that's why I'm still able to compete in those divisions.
There was talk of you fighting Manny Pacquiao at one point. You seem to be like near the front of the line. Is that still a possibility? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know, man. We were close to getting that last year. We were supposed to have done that for July of last year, but then with this whole pandemic, screwing things up for everybody, I think, it kind of went dark for a while. And now later in the year, we started hearing more about Pacquiao McGregor, and then now we've heard of maybe Pacquiao Garcia or all these other things. So it's I think maybe Manny is looking for a big fight with the least amount of risk. Him and Conor McGregor would probably do big numbers, but there's really no risk for Manny, and same thing with this kid Ryan. I mean, I don't think he possesses any threat for Manny. So maybe that's why they're looking at that, or possibly doing an exhibition with that kid, because it makes a lot of money and no risk. So I mean, at this point, I don't know. I have heard that from like Sean Giddens mentioned through another interview that they still want to fight me. But I mean, I like I said, Manny's got a big team of people, and I don't know what route he's gonna take. Everybody's trying to work for Manny to give him the best deal, and unless I hear directly from Manny, or if I sit down at some table and they actually, present me with an actual offer, an actual contract, I can't take anything serious, And if that's gonna be the case, where I'm not even pursuing the fight with Manny as much anymore, I'm gonna look at other options. I can't just be waiting and holding my breath for Manny if I'm not in his agenda.
Now, speaking of other options, aside from Pacquiao, is there one particular fighter you want to face the most?
No, there's no one particular fighter, but there are several names that interest me. A fighter like Danny Garcia was always interesting. Fighter like Sean Porter, Keith Thurman, Yordanis Ugas, who holds the WBA title. These are all big names and fights that interest me a lot. And I think these are fairly easy to get done. I don't see a whole lot of complication getting these fights for me. And so if Manny's, like I said, if Manny's not available or out of the picture, if he's busy with some other fight, then I'm gonna pursue a fight with some of these other names.
So if you could, I don't know if you can, you mentioned a slew of names, but if you could list maybe your top 3 choices for your next bout, who would they be?
I would go after Ugas because he's a champion. Go straight to the top. Go after Ugas, win that title, and pursue a rematch with Errol Spence. That would be what I would do if it was up to me and if it was available.
I like that. You sort of answered this question, I think, earlier. You've also discussed the possibility of fighting Terrence Crawford, given the promotional ties that he has. Is that something that's even worth talking about?
I've said it, that'd be a great fight, and I think if he were to, in a way, be able to work without Top Rank in the picture, then I think that can be very exciting for everybody. I mean, I'm sure he would love to take on more fights, against real fighters and champions and even other guys, not just like me, but like the Danny Garcia, the Thurman, the Porter, the Spence. But as long as he's with Top Rank, he seems very limited on opponents. So that's kind of it unfair to criticize Terrence. Sometimes we in media have criticized some of his opponents, but it's unfair like that because he's tied down to Top Rank with limited options. But if he does leave Top Rank, or if he's able to work, around and make a demand to fight, myself or anybody else, that'd be great. I would definitely accept a fight with Terrence. He's a terrific fighter. He's an excellent fighter and great skills, and has been one of the most accomplished of this generation as well.
Okay. Switching gears for a second, you've come up quite a bit on social media recently. I saw Devin Haney call you out for a shot. Did you have any reaction to that?
I don't really have a reaction. I mean, he's young and confident, and that's what a young fighter needs to do. Young fighters, want to take on the bigger names, the champions, to make a name for themselves. That's what they got to do. And Davin he's a young, hungry fighter. He's up and coming. He's holding a version of the WBC lightweight title. He wants to make a bigger name for himself. I totally understand and get where he's coming from, but is the fight really something that can happen? I mean, maybe in the near future. My mind is not on fighting him right now. I'm trying to fight guys at 147 for another world title. I'm not really trying to fight him. But in the near future, I mean, sure, that's a possibility.
Now, we saw you on social media as well recently. You gave Bob Arum the business on IG Live. What inspired you to eviscerate him like that when usually you're very diplomatic about that situation?
Yeah, I'm usually diplomatic, but I think it's time for people to just fucking know that there's other things that happen in boxing and how business is run, and everybody, all these so-called business people, promoters or managers or whatever, they get all offended when someone talks bad about them, but they're able to open their mouth and talk down about other fighters, and that's bullshit. I ain't gonna, I said, fuck that. Plus, I get all these messages all the time from fans or commenting, oh, you should fight this guy, you should fight that guy. Why didn't you fight this guy? Why don't you fight Loma? Why don't you fight Teofimo? Why don't you fight Crawford? And again, the fans sometimes don't know all the intricacies, all the details behind it. But, I'm trying to remind people that me and Top Rank had a falling out, and I kept it cordial for a long time. And most people in Top Rank have always been respectful. But every once in a while, here comes Bob opening his big mouth without even knowing. I don't even believe he knew the actual details of the lawsuit that we had. I don't think they even told him the truth. His workers or his people around him were only giving him, their side of the story to make them, look like they're doing such a great job. And I was the one being difficult when it really wasn't like that. I proposed to mediate. I proposed to negotiate a new contract. I proposed to settle. I proposed a lot of things before finally going to court. And they always kept shutting down, kept turning me down. And like I said, I don't think Bob Arum knew all this stuff. So it's easy for him to open his mouth without even knowing the fact. And that's when I said, no, I ain't gonna keep quiet no more. I don't have to keep quiet. I ain't got no business with him. And if they're such professionals about their job and their promotion, then they should keep my business away and separate our conflicts and our disagreements with other fighters. My brother has a lot of fighters with Top Rank, and they shouldn't get hurt if I say something bad about the company, and they shouldn't reflect on some of the other fighters. It shouldn't overlap, or it shouldn't roll over. They should be able to distinguish the differences. But whenever someone says something bad about them, they get all butthurt and they call my brother and call my nephew, and that I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be doing that. Well, but they're able to fucking open their mouth and no repercussions. Well, I said, fuck that, no more.
Well, I totally understand. Without violating maybe a confidentiality clause or what have you, is there anything more you can say about why you felt it was important for you to leave Top Rank to further your career?
At the end of my contract with Top Rank, we had a contract. It was my second contract with them. I had just had my title defense January of 2014. My contract expired February of 2014, except for a condition that stated if I was champion, I owe them X amount of title fights. And the interpretation that I had, my understanding was that I would give them, I think it was 3 title fights or title defense. I think that was the term that the ran out. It was title defenses or title fights. And so since my contract was basically up only for the extension that applied, I asked to negotiate another contract. They said no. Then they were trying to offer me a fight with Gamboa, but they wanted me to sign a whole new contract, like another 3-year contract. But they didn't want to renegotiate the terms. They just wanted to extend the term of the contract without actually negotiating, purses or any details. And I said, no, I'll take the Gamboa fight without any extension, just keep the contract as it is. And they denied. They said no. They needed me to sign another extension. And I explained to them, okay, so you're asking me to sign a whole new contract. What's the contract right now? Like what are the terms right now? I thought you said we still have an extension already for the title fights and title defenses. But they knew that could end any time, so they wanted me to sign a whole new contract. I said no, and that's when we entered the lawsuit. Then later that same year, because of inactivity, the WBO asked me to vacate the title. They basically stripped me from the title. It had been like 9 months, 10 months of no fights, and they were gonna propose an interim title. In the meantime, it was actually Orlando Salido who picked it up against Kokid Jim, a guy from Thailand. And they asked me, look, if you're not fighting, we need you to vacate the title because, it's inactivity. So, again, I was forced to vacate the title, not under my own will. It was Top Rank that just wouldn't book any fights for me. So, again, now I have no title, okay? I have no title fight, and I have no title defenses to offer, and it's all Top Rank, fault. So if I don't have any title fights, if I don't have any title defenses to offer, how can you apply that clause that extends the contract? So that was my whole argument. It's not only, unfair for me to not fight, but it's also Top Rank's fault that I'm not fighting. And how can I offer that? How can you try to apply? How can Top Rank try to enforce a clause that says title fights or title defenses, as an extension when it's their own fault that I lost my title? So it was a whole argument. I tried to settle. I tried to go to mediation. I tried to renegotiate the contract. I gave them opportunity to work fight by fight or 5 fights at a time. I tried to, end this, and smooth things out. They kept saying nope. Till the very last moment, when we finally went to court, and I was able to walk away without paying anything, without negotiating it, without paying them, without the only fighter to ever probably done that. Actually, it felt good, but it did take time from my career. And looking back at that, it's like I say, if you're working for say a TV channel or a website, whatever promotion you're working for, and your contract ends and your boss or former boss says, okay, well, I'm not going to renegotiate. I don't need to, I'm not going to renegotiate anything with you. But then you ask, well, can I get a letter, saying that, we're done. That way I can go look for a job somewhere else. And he says, nope, I'm not going to give you that either. Well, then how do you expect to go feed your family? How do you expect to go pay your bills? How do you expect to make a living? If they're not giving you any work and they're not letting you work, so that's the kind of thought that I have basically against Bob Arum and some of those Top Rank, because they obviously didn't care if I had any way to make a living or not. They're not letting me fight, but then they also weren't giving me any opportunities to fight. If they really were my promoters, if they really believed that the contract, the extension was valid, then why weren't they offering me any fights? Why wouldn't they be doing their part as a promoter to promote me, to offer fights? Under contract, they were supposed to give me 4 fights a year, 4 fights per year, and they didn't offer a single one. So, I mean, if that's the way they behave, then fuck them. They don't care. They're just an assembly line. They have their fighter, they groom them, they make them into a mini star and then a big star, and they squeeze everything they can out of them. And when that fighter loses or is done, they throw him away and they go on to the next guy. They're an assembly line. It's like an assembly line right there. They don't really care about the fighters. They don't care about the well-being. Now, they are a very good company to groom a fighter, to build a fighter. Yes, some of the biggest stars have been affiliated with Top Rank at one point or another. But guess what? Most of the ones that have made it so much bigger have also left the company. And if everybody's leaving the company, I mean, it must be for a reason.
Wow. After going through all that, I mean, what do you tell young fighters so they don't end up in a situation like that?
Not every fighter is in the same position or same situation. Some fighters are fine and well having a promoter like Top Rank, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just like them to be very smart, be careful, have somebody that really represents them, whether it's a manager, an advisor, an attorney, or a combination. Just be smart, make sure that they have their best interest, that they're not doing anything just for the money. A manager might sometimes accept a fight because it's a bigger purse, because that means it's a bigger cut for himself. Well, then that's not a good manager. A manager should be looking after the best interest of the fighter first. Same thing with the promoter. If the fighter has a promotional contract, and the promoter is not doing the best, you have to have somebody that represents you that will do his best. I just like to tell all the fighters, just to be smart, and they can always ask me questions. I mean, everybody here at the gym, knows that I've, gone through a lot and I have experience. And even though I don't get involved, too much, I also don't want to be, causing problems for anybody. But, you kind of open their eyes a little bit just to be smarter about how they handle their business. If the contracts are coming up to the end, and maybe you can renegotiate. You don't have to leave the company. I'm not saying, all the promoters are bad or every contract is bad and every fighter should be on their own. No, most fighters need a promoter. They don't have the means to promote themselves. They need a promoter to give them advice, to groom them, to build their careers. It's part of the game. I totally understand that also. But just to be smart, be careful. Ask for representation, fair representation. Don't feel pressured into accepting or signing anything. In the end, at the end of the day, it's the fighter who's most important in this game, because you're the only one that's actually getting in the ring. You're the one that's actually putting your life and your health on the line. The promoter, if you're the promoter and the fighter gets injured, you paid insurance for their medical already, and you go on to the next guy. The promoters, they keep going. They go. I'm telling you, it's like an assembly line. They squeeze everything they can out of one fighter, and then they move on to the next. And you, as a fighter, you can't just ask for another body, for another limb or another brain or another heart or whatever. That's your body. So get paid, get compensated for what you're doing, for entertaining the fans and everybody, and you're fighting. Take care of your health, take care of your body, get paid for it, because you never know what could happen next. Most fighters, most fighters don't make great amount of money, so be smart about it. Be careful with the way they spend their money. So that's kind of the stuff that I always like to preach and tell all the fighters.
You became maybe the expert going through all this. Have you thought about becoming a manager later on?
I have. I've talked about it. I've already kind of started getting my feet wet. I help manage and advise Josito Lopez. I have a couple other fighters that we work with that I was also giving them advice, like Lindolfo Delgado. I was giving him some advice. Misael Rodriguez, I was helping him a little bit for some time. But it's just hard for me to really give my 110% right now.
Of course,
just because I'm also a fighter. I'm also been busy with my stuff. So it's hard for me to really be the one. So I've only kind of, like I said, given them advice here and there. Josito, I've worked with a little longer. I've actually helped a little more with him. I have other fighters, Brandon Glanton, who allows me to work with him. He's from Atlanta. He's a light heavyweight, cruiserweight. And so I do, like I said, have other fighters that we work with, but I can't do it full time. Not right now. Maybe in the near future I will. I've talked about it. I'm trying to put together another entity where we advise the fighters, and we also help them manage their finances, their financial situations, with retirement accounts, for like a retirement plan for after boxing. Maybe start putting money away for investments. Maybe just help them look at boxing as just a small platform to help them, for the future. Not think, because I mean, come on, most kids don't have that kind of education. They don't have the financial education, and it only comes with experience. It only comes after you spend, most of your money. It costs money, to learn, and unfortunately they spend their money to learn that it wasn't the right thing to do. So maybe we can start helping kids, and young fighters early on to live, a more modest, more comfortable life like that, and put more money away towards, retirement plans or whatever, and focus on that. So I'm already looking into doing that, but like I said, in the near future, not full time right away.
That's great. Getting back to boxing real quick, you've made a lot of money, these past 5 years or so. Is it difficult to maintain the same hunger and to accomplish more in the sport of boxing?
Oh, the money has nothing to do with it. The money just allows me to live a little more comfortable for myself and my family, my kids, but the hunger's still there. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm going to be champion 2 or 3 more times. Like, I just know it. This last year was not the best year for everyone in boxing with the pandemic, but I think things are going to start changing. They already are. Things are looking better now. So I have no doubt in my mind that I'm going to be back and the top of the game. I'm not done. I'm just not done. If it would have been, if I would have been comfortable, accomplishing world titles prior, to today, I would have retired a long time ago. I mean, I was champion at featherweight, then super featherweight, lightweight, unified lightweight, super lightweight. I mean, I've done a lot, and I'm still not done. I don't consider that enough for me. I still want more.
When would you like to return to the ring in 2021? Realistically, what are you targeting?
Sometime, early summer. I think that'd be good time. Just because there's no real fight yet, so I can't really give you guys an exact time. But I sometime in the early summer, maybe late May, early June, sometime like that. Maybe even if it has to be a little after, maybe early July even. I mean, I want to fight, obviously, before but we also have, there's a lot of things that go into it, not just myself. It's not just up to me. It's up to, the opponents, state regulations right now with COVID, to the commissions, venues, there's a whole lot that goes to it. And it's not just, what I want, it's what's available. So sometime May or June would be ideal. If it has to roll over to, July, fine. But I would like to do something.
That'd be great.
So you were a kid when Fernando Vargas and your brother won world titles in the 1990s. I was there. I saw it. I saw you when you were a little kid. Did you imagine then that your accomplishments would exceed their accomplishments?
No, I never even thought about being a fighter. I never thought of being a boxer. I didn't see myself as a fighter. I would see them. I would see their fights. I would go to their fights. But I never thought I would be doing it for a career. I thought I would probably, honestly, I thought I would be somewhere in the law enforcement or in law school, becoming an attorney or something like that. I didn't think I would I'd be a fighter.
Yeah, I think once upon a time you told me that you resisted it. You didn't want to be a fighter, and it happened anyway, I guess, didn't it? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. It started when I was actually 14. I had my first amateur fight at 14, which is a little later than most fighters. Most kids start at 8 or 10. So I had a little bit of a later start. Not too much, not too late, but a little later than the average kid.
The last question. You're only 33 years old. You could probably fight at a high level for 5 years or more, probably, if you wanted to. Do you think about how much longer you want to stay with it? I mean, you mentioned you want to accomplish more things, but do you think about a cap to your career?
I don't put a cap in age. I'll just figure that out when my body tells me that's enough. When my body tells me that's enough, if I start seeing signs, or my brother, my nephew, start seeing me slow down, then that's when we'll call it a night. And I think we're pretty good at that. We've told other fighters, when it's time to call it. My dad told my brother. My brother was only 26, when he retired. And when it's time, when your body is telling you, to stop, then that's when you got to stop. So I don't have an age a cap in age or accomplishments. I don't like, I got to be champion one more time and that's it. No, I don't have that. I just know that there's still time for me to become champion, and I will be champion. There's no doubt in my mind that I'll be champion 2 or 3 more times. And believe me when I say that, I will be. And then, like I said, my body will tell me when it's time to call it.
We just saw a 43-year-old quarterback win the Super Bowl. I guess age isn't as important anymore.
You got to take care of your body, take care of your health, and dedicate, your life to it. Well, I've done so for boxing. I've taken care. I've dedicated myself, and I'm motivated. I'm hungry. Brady is the greatest football player of all time. I don't think there's any other, not just quarterback, but just player. I don't think there's another player that can be equal to Tom Brady. Just like Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao in boxing. It's unbelievable what some of these fighters like Manny and Floyd have done, even at later age. Tom Brady, same thing. He's so much older than all these, have his age, and he's fucking killing it. He's got that fire, that drive, and he takes care of his body. He's dedicated.
Great stuff. As usual, Mikey, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. It's always a pleasure.
All right, let's take a look at some important matchups that are taking place this week. One is in the 154-pound weight class, a division ruled by WBA, WBC, and IBF champion Jermell Charlo. But the WBO belt is still out there, held by Patrick Teixeira, and he's got a big challenge ahead of him this Saturday as he takes on the undefeated Brian Castaño. Mike, in terms of styles, what do you make of this matchup?
Well, I think Teixeira is more of a boxer than Castaño. He uses his long jab, and I'm going to get back to that jab in a minute here. He also moves. He actually moves his feet, even though he's a tall, long guy. He's content. He's the kind of guy who's content to outpoint you. Castaño is a capable boxer too, but he's more of a stalker, a guy who comes after you with bad intentions, that kind of guy. Although he's not wild or anything like that. It's very controlled. It's not a huge puncher, but his hands are heavy though. He can hurt people. And I think his hands are heavier than Teixeira's. I think the matchup will make for a good fight. One note I wanted to mention, this really jumped out at me. Teixeira has a 9-inch reach advantage.
Jeez.
He's got long arms.
Yes.
Teixeira has short arms. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like.
Wow. I mean, Teixeira's a tricky southpaw. He's been on a nice run, wins over Nathaniel Gallimore, Carlos Adames. Castaño, his toughest opponent to date. He's a versatile boxer, puncher. Both of these guys are big players in the 154-pound division. We've touched on this a bit, but what are the implications of this bout for that weight class?
The winner will hold one of the 4 major titles. And again, fighters want to unify. If I'm Jermell Charlo, who holds 3 of the 4 major titles right now, I want to fight the Teixeira Castaño winner to become undisputed 154-pound champion. And I'm sure that Teixeira and Castaño would want exactly the same thing. Now, the question is, can they make that fight? We'll see how that plays out, but it's very attractive to all parties.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Jermell Charlo's watching this fight very closely to see who wins. Who do you like?
I think Castaño's pressure is going to wear down Teixeira. It's controlled aggression, I think, and it made life very difficult for guys like Michel Soro and Erislandy Lara. I got to think that it's going to do the same thing against Teixeira. I'm going to go with the challenger by unanimous decision.
I think this is a 50-50 bout. Teixeira can fight on the outside, and he hits with enough pop to perhaps keep Castaño honest. Plus, Castaño tends to fight at one pace, which I don't think he can afford to do here. But I also think both fighters understand what's at stake. Both are going to bring their A games. And if both fighters are on their A games, I like Castaño's a little more. There has to be some concern about whether he can win a decision against the house fighter. But all things on the up and up, I see him winning a close decision. Now, also this weekend, we've got a pretty good matchup between former lightweight champion Richard Comey and Jackson Mariñez, who, as many of you recall, fought Rolando Romero last year in a fight a lot of people thought Mariñez won. Mike, what's your take on the style matchup?
Well, you're the expert on Ghanaian fighters, but from my perspective, Comey is a pretty good boxer, but really an offensive-minded power puncher. He's got 26 knockouts in his 29 victories, so that's really no secret. Teofimo Lopez sort of exposed Comey's limitations, in my opinion, but he's a good fighter. He looked really good against Ray Beltran in the fight before that, for example. As for Marinez, he's a measured boxer, but a good one. Better than I would have thought before the Rolando Romero fight. I really liked what I saw in that fight. I thought he outboxed Romero and deserved the decision. He didn't get it, but I thought he deserved it. Marinez works with Robert Garcia, who I know thinks really highly of him.
Yeah, it's a great match. We got the veteran versus the up and comer, the power puncher versus the stick and move boxer. So I think it's all about who can impose their will. Who will that be?
Well, I think we're going to learn a lot about Comey in this fight. You know, his last fight was that loss against Teofimo Lopez.
Sure.
And that was a bad knockout. That was a bad loss. That's the kind of loss that can actually have a negative impact on your psyche.
Yeah.
If he's at his best, he'd be a lot for Marinez to handle, I think. If not, he could get outboxed. I'm not going to predict what Comey's mindset might be in the fight, but I have a feeling Marinez is going to be able to handle Comey's power. I think he's going to outbox him to win a close but clear decision.
I like it. I like the pick. And of course you're going to do that because you know I'm going with Ghana.
Yeah, I know.
It wasn't good to me last year, but you can't shake who you are, Mike. And I wear my Ghana colors with pride. I think Comey's going to struggle early on. Marinez impressed me a whole lot versus Rolando Romero, but I expect Comey to find his way, and eventually his steady pressure will wear Marinez down and put him away in 8 rounds. Now, this is make or break, I guess, early on in our prediction league. Both of us are 2-1. So these are pivotal fights for us early in the year. Stay tuned. It's time for Mike and I to go toe to toe. And this week we've got some hot debates as we share our thoughts on who won the following 3 bouts. Floyd Mayweather versus Jose Luis Castillo, the first fight. Oscar De La Hoya versus Pernell Whitaker, and the infamous Marvin Marvis Hagler versus Sugar Ray Leonard bout. We're going to go in chronological order, descending. Let's start with the Floyd Mayweather versus Jose Luis Castillo bout. This was the first time they met, April 20th, 2002. Mayweather, 25 years old. He was the king at 130 pounds, defended his title there 8 times, moving up to face the lightweight king, Castillo, who at 28 was just hitting his prime. Mayweather controlled much of the early action, but it was a lot closer in the second half of the fight. A lot of observers felt that Castillo deserved the nod, but the 3 judges didn't see it that way. All 3 scored it for Mayweather, 116-111, 116-111, 115-110. Mike, did you agree with their scores?
In the end, I did. We probably should mention that the scores were a bit odd because both guys were docked a point for fouls.
Yeah.
I have to say, after watching the fight again today, that I really don't understand the controversy, even though people I respect thought it was a close fight. HBO's Harold Letterman, may rest in peace, had it 115-111 for Castillo, which is 8 rounds to 4. I just don't get it. I thought Castillo was the aggressor, and I think he had some moments as a result of his pressure, which picked up in the middle rounds, and he was strongest, in the second half of the fight. But in my opinion, it was only marginally effective aggression. As a matter of fact, I thought before I watched it again, I somehow would recall that it was more effective than it really was. Yeah. I just thought Mayweather did a terrific job of sticking and moving. He got in, landed his punches, he got out. Castillo won some rounds later in the fight, but it wasn't enough for me. I had the same score as 2 of the judges, 115-111, which is 8 rounds to 4 for Mayweather. Now, I should point out something is actually about all 3 of the fights that we're going to discuss. The only one I was actually at was De La Hoya and Whitaker. I wasn't at Mayweather Castillo. I wasn't at Leonard Hagler, unfortunately. Would have loved to have been at that one. So I wasn't at Mayweather Castillo. Maybe it looked different in person, which I think it often does. But from TV, it looked like a clear victory for Mayweather. I was a little bit surprised at how clear it would be after, not having seen it for such a long time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I thought that Mayweather outboxed him. Not Not by much, not by how much he typically does, but I think 8-4, 7-5 even is a fine scorecard. I've seen the fight a dozen times. I've never had Castillo winning. I do think that elements play a factor, as you mentioned. It was a pro Castillo crowd. Quite frankly, I thought it was pro Castillo commentating as well. And Castillo was the aggressor, but he lost way too many early rounds, in my opinion, and he certainly didn't win 7 of the last 8, as some suggested. Floyd was the superior boxer, but he also did a lot better on the inside than people tend to give him credit for. In fact, obviously Mayweather in his corner, if you listen to his corner, they were seeing a completely different fight than what the fans and the commentators were seeing. They were seeing what the judges saw, which was that he was in control. I remember after 10 rounds, Roger telling Mayweather, okay, now it's time to break him down and really beat him up. And he told Floyd, get on now, fight him on the inside. And Floyd did that in the 11th round. It was the best round of the fight and really showed just how versatile he was. Why do you think not just the people in the crowd, Mike, but a lot of people in general seem to think that Castillo won this fight? It's almost, in boxing, it's like one of those things that people, oh yeah, he lost the first fight to, Mayweather lost the first fight to Castillo, as if it's common knowledge and everyone agrees with it.
Yeah, I think it's a legend. And Mayweather wasn't even polarizing, I don't believe, at that time. I don't know. What's interesting is I didn't watch the main broadcast. I watched or went back and watched and listened to the international broadcast.
I see.
The announcer was much more benign. He was really down the middle. So I didn't get that because obviously I didn't hear Letterman's thing. I just saw that on BoxRec.
I see.
You know what? I think things become accepted, then they become legends, and then somehow they end up being facts, even though they're not facts. One take. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the commentating was really skewed. In fact, Larry Murphy, he was roasting Mayweather after the fight. As if it was a clear robbery.
I try to do everything I do completely objectively. I don't understand. I don't get it. One takeaway for me was a young Mayweather's ability to move as well as he did.
Yeah.
I knew he moved well earlier in his career, but I saw it again. I got used to the older, more flat-footed Mayweather who relied more on his shoulder roll to avoid punches, and he was just an absolute master at that. But he had quick feet. He had great footwork in that fight. Anyway, it was interesting to see that from him. Also, here's the punch stats. For what it's worth, Castillo landed 203 of 506 overall. Mayweather 157 of 448. Now that's a 40% connect rate for Castillo, which I find
really off. Yeah,
I think it's way off. Listen, I'm just kind of going with my gut on that one, but it seems way off. I didn't count punches. Castillo also landed 173 power punches to Mayweather's 66. Again, those numbers just don't seem right to me. I don't know what they were watching either, but everybody's got opinion on these fights. I just don't see it in that fight. To me, it was a clear victory for Mayweather.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up that thing about Mayweather. We've discussed Mayweather versus Pacquiao so many times, but I always point out, everyone says Pacquiao was not the same, and I'm like, I think Mayweather was even more faded than Pacquiao was. And I think it shows in that, Mayweather didn't look too hot against Andre Berto. He did win clearly, whereas Pacquiao was able to not dominate, but beat a good champion in Keith Thurman. But you look at that version of Floyd versus, the one at 130, 135, 140, and you go, man, he slowed down a ton. He barely threw punches in his last few fights or so. So, it's always good to go back and see how good Pretty Boy Floyd was as opposed to Money Mayweather, who was pretty damn good as well. Let's move to the next controversial matchup, De La Hoya versus Whitaker. April 12th, 1997, De La Hoya, the Golden Boy. Name speaks for itself. The 24-year-old rising star. He was already a 3-division champ. Hadn't faced the best in any of those prior 3 divisions, but had beaten good champions. Taking on Whitaker, his biggest test. Whitaker, obviously a legend, but at 33 was showing signs of age. His last 3 fights, he hadn't looked so hot. So this one was an intriguing matchup, a super fight, and there wasn't that much action. But De La Hoya won a unanimous decision by 2 scores of 116-110, a third of 115-111. A lot of ringside observers and sport writers felt that Whitaker won the fight. What saith you?
some real quick thought before I get into that. It wasn't the most entertaining fight I ever saw. I was reminded of that when I watched it again. A very, very tactical fight. That's kind of the fighter that Whittaker was. Whittaker might, arguably is the best fighter of my lifetime. Certainly one of a handful of best fighters, but he wasn't always really that much fun to watch. I think it was a tough fight to score. Whittaker landed more punches, but De La Hoya generally connected with the harder shots from my perspective. So you just have to ask yourself which carries more weight. I scored the fight 114, 112 the night of the fight. Remember, I was at this fight. Seven rounds to 5. I remember a real quick anecdote after the fight. Ron Borges, boxing writer Ron Borges, is one of my best friends in the business. Asked me, who did you have winning? I said, De La Hoya, and he just goes, Homer. Because Oscar and I are both from
Ron Borges.
Because he'll tell you exactly what he thinks. He doesn't even care how much he likes you. But the point being is that Oscar and I are both from Los Angeles. But that's really how I saw it. Anyway, so it was interesting for me to go back and score it again. I watched it today and did that. I scored it. Actually, I'm sorry, last night. So this time I had it 113, a draw.
Wow.
Now that means that ridiculous WBC rule that required a point deduction from the guy who wasn't cut from an accidental headbutt cost Whittaker the fight. I mean, that's one of the all-time dumbest rules in the history.
It is.
In the history of the world. I'm going to go beyond sports.
Or?
No, I don't. I you know what? I have to guess that they don't. But it was just one of the goofiest, dumbest rules, and it cost, in my opinion, Whittaker the fight. But in the end, it really didn't, because somehow De La Hoya won by a very wide margin. Honestly, I think the fight could have gone either way. Whittaker, you mentioned he was 33 years old. He wasn't in his prime, but he was still pretty damn good. And De La Hoya is only 24, I believe. He chose to face one of the best fighters of all time in his first fight at 147 pounds. That took some balls. And I think he handled himself well, regardless of the outcome. Bottom line for me, I think both of my scores are legitimate, given my different perspectives. Again, fights just look different from ringside and on television, so I don't think I'm necessarily wrong either way. But I will say that I think that the official scores were just too wide in De La Hoya's favor.
They certainly were, and you're right. Whittaker wasn't completely past his prime when he fought Oscar. He was past his prime. I do want to make one note though. At the time Oscar moved up to 47, I think he deserves credit for fighting one of the champions. But given past performances, Whittaker was considered the weakest of the 3 champions. That may or may not have been true, but you think about the Hurtado fight where he got dropped twice against an unknown fighter.
Probably thought he was vulnerable.
And I believe there were 2 Rivera fights where before that. First one was controversial, where Whittaker won a very controversial decision over Rivera, and in the rematch it was a lot more clear, but you could see the signs of decline. The other 2 champions at the time were 2 undefeated, very strong, hard-hitting guys in Felix Trinidad and Ike Corte. So Whittaker was viewed as sort of the weakest champion in the division. I don't know if that was true or not, because whatever he had left, he summoned up all of it for the De La Hoya fight. I had Whittaker winning 7 rounds to 5. I thought he controlled the fight with his jab like he did most of his fights, but it was a very, very close fight. On top of that, it was a extremely pro De La Hoya crowd, and they cheered every single Oscar miss as if it landed. And Oscar missed a lot. So I feel that no doubt skewed what folks saw in the ring. But even if it didn't, I thought P landed enough clean shots, controlled the pace, made Oscar miss, and he sealed it with the brilliant 11th round. You're like, what are you talking about? It's something I've noticed a lot of great boxers do. They always have a great 11th round. It sounds crazy, but I feel when they're comfortably ahead, they try and close the deal in the 11th so they can coast in the 12th. Now, P also scored that flash knockdown. I'm with you. The fact that it wasn't even a close decision, but a clear unanimous to me decision was kind of strange. And P didn't do himself any favors. The showboating, which was part and parcel of his career, certainly didn't help here. And
I don't mind that.
I don't either, although he was a little extra in this fight. To be fair, he was extra throughout his career. And I thought one interesting thing that happened in between rounds, I forget what round it was, but Lou Duva, Whittaker's trainer, who probably seen Whittaker get robbed one time too many, imploring him to step it up, and he said, "You might lose this fight." And Whittaker snapped back. I remember. He goes, "Then I'm going to lose."
Yeah, I remember that. Interesting.
And I think, Whittaker thought, hey, I'm doing what I need to do to win the rounds, but obviously that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I mentioned Harold Letterman, rest in peace. I hope Pernell Whitaker rests in peace.
Yeah.
That was I think that was one of the fights where Oscar sort of solidified Oscar's reputation of Las Vegas being his town. How you weren't going to get a decision in Las Vegas, and then Trinidad did, in my opinion.
Right.
It's one of the worst of all time. Right. So yeah, it all leads to.
I don't know about the worst of all time, but yeah.
one of my career, one of the worst of my career. And I also want to mention this. The Las Vegas Review-Journal polled 26 boxing writers who were at ringside. 14 had Whitaker winning, 11 had De La Hoya winning.
Wow.
And I think one had it to draw. Here, I'll throw out the CompuBox numbers again. Whitaker landed 232 of 582 overall. De La Hoya 191 of 556. Whitaker landed 160 jabs to 45 for De La Hoya. So yeah, it was Whitaker jabbing and De La Hoya throwing power shots, and whichever one you like more.
Right, exactly. All right, time for our last fight. An age-old debate that will probably carry on through the end of time. Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Sugar Ray Leonard, April 6, 1987. I mean, it got no bigger. The great Leonard, he had only one fight since retiring in 1982, coming out of retirement, moving up in weight to take on the longtime middleweight strongman Hagler. It was a brilliant clash of styles that went to full 12. One judge had it 115, 113 Hagler, and the other two scored it for Leonard, 115, 113, and then an absurd 118, 110 to make him the new middleweight champion. What were your thoughts?
I think it was another fight that was difficult to score, in my opinion. A lot of the rounds, more than these other fights, I think, a lot of the rounds could have gone either way. I scored at 115, 113 for Leonard, which I think is about what I scored it while I watched it live on TV. I thought Leonard was a lot quicker than Hagler. I thought he caught Hagler with a lot of clean punches when Hagler was coming in, and Leonard danced away from trouble beautifully much of the night. And all that, I think, is remarkable, given that Leonard hadn't fought in almost 3 years. I mean, the thought of him coming back from a 3-year hiatus to face a guy like Hagler, even if Hagler was starting to decline, is still pretty remarkable thing. Hagler definitely got in his licks. He kept the pressure on Leonard, and he did particularly good body work, I thought. In the end, I just didn't think it was quite enough. I also don't, but I do. I'll explain why I do later. I was going to say, I don't really understand the controversy after scoring the fight again from TV. I could see either guy winning a close fight, frankly. I have to add this, though. This is just, it's sort of eye-popping. UPI, which is kind of like an old news service that really barely exists anymore, did a poll of 21 writers who were there. 18 of 21 had Hagler winning the fight.
Wow.
So that makes me think that the fight looked a lot different in person. I think our listeners need to know that. I think this is a case where the fight, if you see it live in person, is going to look a lot different from TV. For example, sometimes you feel the power of shots when you're there, I think, more than you do on TV. That's just one example. I'd like to see what other scores people come up with for this fight. For me, though, Leonard did just enough to win a close decision and what might be the biggest victory of his career.
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought Leonard won 7 rounds to 5. I felt like Hagler let him take the plate away from him. Look, there were moments in the fight where I thought like, oh, Hagler's completely taken over and is going to pummel, Leonard. It looked like he was going to pummel Leonard down the stretch, but Leonard found those moments. I mean, he basically stole rounds. He was the superior ring general that night. He had the better ring IQ. And one thing that doesn't get mentioned, sure, Hagler fought a pretty good fight. He was steady, but I thought that Leonard dug a little deeper than Hagler did when he was low in the tank. I thought Ray deserved the decision. One thing I want to point out, as you said, you mentioned he was past his prime. Hagler to me was just not the same. He was so much slower than he was in his prime. Not a shell, but certainly not the same. There were a lot of close rounds that could have gone either way, but Leonard finished strong. It wasn't just the early rounds. I mean, both were gassed, but Leonard showed really a lot. How could he not have won over people's hearts with his performance that night? I mean, I think that was just incredible what he did.
There's a lot of reasons to love Sugar Ray Leonard. One of them was his guts. He had a lot of guts. In addition to being a great athlete and a great fighter, he had a fighting spirit that's to be admired. So did Hagler. Love both those guys. Here are the stats if people want them. Leonard landed 306 of 929 punches overall. Wow. 929 is a lot of punches. Didn't even seem like that many. Hagler, 291 of 792. And you mentioned this earlier, for the record, the 118-110 score of Jose Guerra was just way out of line. There's no way that Leonard won 110 rounds.
He never scored a major fight again.
I think that was, by the way, I think that was the best. That was the most entertaining of the three fights that we've discussed, I think. Maybe partly because the magnitude was just so freaking, they're all huge fights, but the magnitude of that fight was just through the roof.
Yeah, and you could tell from just the fans and the crowd. And I mean, it was just amazing. Just an amazing fight. I encourage all you young fans, make sure you watch it and just appreciate who Ray Leonard was, understand how far out of weight he was fighting and how deep into his career he was at that time. And to come out of retirement and do that was just incredibly impressive. All right.
I'm sorry to interrupt you before you sign off. But this was a lot of fun. And we need to do this again soon.
Yeah, I think there ought to be a part 2. I'm thinking of some pretty controversial fights that I'd like to get into with you. Hopkins Taylor one comes to mind. There's so many more that we could do. So perhaps we should consider that. But it sure was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed going back and watching these fights. All right, that is now gonna do it for this week's show. Yeah. Want to thank Mikey Garcia for taking the time out to catch up with us. And as always, we want to thank you guys for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to us on whatever platform you found us on. And check back in next week for more interviews and boxing talk right here on the PBC Podcast.